with Google Spotlight Stories. How many of you have not seen any of our stories so far? Okay, a good number of people. So there will be an opportunity to see it. So for those of you who don't know what we are and what we do, who are we? Well, we're a research and development group that exists within Google. It originally started out as part of Motorola in the mobile phone business. And what we're focused on is we're focused on answering certain kinds of interesting questions about immersive storytelling. Questions like, how can you tell a story that's interesting from beginning to end, that's meaningful and entertaining? What does it mean to direct a film when the viewer is in control of the camera? What are the creative constraints and the technical constraints of the medium, and how can you work within those constraints to make something that's beautiful and memorable and worth having? How can you do a comedy or an adventure or a road trip musical in VR or 360? So we try to answer these questions by actually making stories. And the approach that we take is we start by seeking out directors who are already accomplished filmmakers or storytellers in some other medium, film, television, children's books. And we try to find people who, they have a story that they'd like to pitch to us that's an interesting story, but it also has to be something that feels like it needs to be made immersively. It can't just be something that I wanted to do a short film and I was hoping you guys would somehow find a way to turn it into VR. That's not really what we do. We try to find stories that have some kind of organic connection to the medium that makes us feel like I want to see that in VR. And making these stories with these directors is what pushes us to develop the tech and the tools that are the right tools for the medium, that are solving the real problems you encounter in real production situations. And hopefully we find answers to some of these interesting questions along the way. So our stories are all interactive, but they're not interactive in a game-like way, in the way that interactivity is usually used in these conversations. What we mean by interactivity is really that we are interactive with your attention as a viewer, because all of the devices that we operate on, whether it's a mobile phone, a Daydream, a Rift, etc., they all have sensors that can detect what direction you're looking. And so the interactivity comes in that we can adapt the story to respond to your attention moment by moment. The story might wait until you are looking in a certain direction before a key storytelling action takes place. Or we might wait until you're not looking to do something like change the entire scenery in the background, like that. And we do all the other kind of filmmaking storytelling tricks, persuading you to look in one direction or another with sound or visual cues. And we talk a lot about rewarding people's curiosity. A lot of our stories will have little side gags and subplots and Easter eggs that only happen if you look in a certain direction. We never want to punish people for making the wrong choice because we want people to feel that freedom, but we always want to make sure that we're adapting to them. And the story itself may be a linear story, or it may branch out into side stories, but all of this interactivity that's happening is entirely subconscious. It's invisible to the viewer. If we've done it right, the viewer does not know that it is happening. All they experience is a linear story that is perfect sense to them, even though the person who tries it right after them may experience the story in a completely different way and even have a different sequence of events happen. So the set of tools that we've been developing over the past 5 years is we kind of group it in the thing that we call the Story Development Kit. It's our SDK. And we have a playback engine that's a kind of game engine-like player. And it's platform agnostic. It works on everything from Android to iOS to Daydream to Rift, Spies, etc. We're always adapting it to new devices as they come out. And another thing we do is we develop our stories simultaneously for more than one platform. So we'll do 3 Degrees of Freedom interactive. We'll do 6 Degrees of Freedom interactive where you can move your head around. stereoscopic, monoscopic 360 video, and even ordinary, good old rectangular, flat, linear films. Reason for that is we're working with these directors and they want to reach the best, broadest audience that they can, and we want each person who sees it to see it in the best way for that medium. Which ends up meaning that the different versions can actually be quite different from each other, and in the process of doing that, we learn a lot about what the differences are between these mediums. So we have made 16 of these so far in the first 5 years that our group has been around. All of them with different directors, different voices, different styles of storytelling. Some of them we've done in-house, some of them we've done with partner studios like Aardman, Nexus, Chromosphere, Real Effects, Passion Pictures. And as I think you've probably heard a few times today, this is still very early times for this medium. There's no formula for like the right way to do it. And so we're doing new experiments with every single time that we do this. We learn a lot from everyone. So these are the two shows I'm going to talk about today. We have Back to the Moon, which Resh did a wonderful tribute to Georges Méliès, the pioneering inventor of so many of the things that we know as visual effects today. And this is in recognition of 100 years of his work. That came out in the spring. And then Age of Sail, which has not been released publicly anywhere yet. You are some of the first people in the world to see it in any form, and you'll be able to see these starting tomorrow. So Back to the Moon was, it's the first collaboration that we've done with a different branch of Google called the Google Doodles team. They're the people, the artists who create those little images or interactive things that you see on Google homepage, and they do a different one every day, and it's amazing. Google Arts and Culture and Nexus, Nexus Studios in London. It's directed by FX Gobi and Helen LaRue. And I'm going to just show you a quick little making of video that they made because it captures a lot of wonderful things about it.
So the Google Doodle team wanted to celebrate Georges Méliès, one of the pioneers of cinema and the inventor of special effects.
A Google Doodle is those little illustrations or animations that you find on the homepage when you do a search. But it's the first time we collaborate with Google Spotlight Stories.
The idea was really to do something pioneering, like Méliès was, so let's do a 360 film, use all the tricks in all the films he's made within these 2-minute stories.
So I really wanted to emphasize very ornamental painterly feelings to all of the assets that we did. Really big eyes to really catch the expression, the squash and stretch from the arm, the legs.
He did what I call, when I brief the animator, unnecessary gestures. So, he could show this plant, but he could also do that. Like, I love that. We were super lucky. We got in touch with the Cinematheque in France. The Cinematheque owns the biggest collection of everything that used to belong to Méliès. All the films, all the objects, the costumes. Having their involvement and approval was extremely important.
Super! The most interesting version of the film is the interactive version of it. The film actually stops and waits for you, and we're having some fun coming up with the tricks that allow you to seamlessly rejoin the action of the film. Google Spotlight Stories will have developed software that allows us to make interactive films in quite intuitive and fun way.
For anyone that did flow diagrams at school, it's a very similar thing where you can set up a number of different story graphs based on where you're looking or based on what else has happened in the scene.
We're here today to record the score with the London Symphony Orchestra in this beautiful, beautiful recording studio.
It was amazing having a whole orchestra. I was very touched by it. For this VR approach, we thought that Google Spotlight Stories was the perfect team to work with.
We have a constant stream of communication with our friends at Google Spotlight Stories. This isn't our first project with them. We've established a relationship with them, and we can start at university level rather than kindergarten level.
Méliès, what he did in the cinema industry. He was too much of a pioneer that we had to translate that with the tools that we have today.
If you had been able to use the 360, he would have used it because he was an explorer, and we really wanted to make him shine again. 118 years after he did these beautiful films. Just like cinema, VR is soon going to become like a social experience, something you share with other people.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about all the possibilities that it can bring.
It's so good.
I'm super excited about storytelling with these new technologies that are going to evolve.
So what are some of the things that make making a film in VR or 360 different from ordinary film? The biggest one that I think most people realize as soon as they start doing it is layout and staging. How do you arrange your story in space? The team at Nexus is really quite expert at doing this, and they approach it with a diligence that's really quite impressive. This is the overhead layout of this tabletop on which the whole story takes place, which is inspired by the toy shop that Méliès ran later in life. Long after he had stopped making films, he had a little toy shop where he made these little automaton things, and so that's where the story takes place. The world around you is divided into a few regions. There's a main region that's a little bit more than 180 degrees in front of you. Why that limited? Well, we don't want to force people to turn around 360 degrees, especially if they're wearing a VR headset with a cable, or if they're, say, sitting on a bus going across town and wanting to watch this thing on their phone. So we keep the main action in that space in front of you. Behind that, you've got a region for supporting elements like the background musicians that are related to the main story but not necessarily critical to it. And then behind you there is a place where you can put things that are completely unnecessary to following the main arc of the story, but hopefully will be something that you can enjoy or be delighted by if you happen to notice them. And this is Nexus's diagram of the timeline of the main thread of the story. But when you add the spatial dimension to it, it looks like this. So these guys are so great. they do this with every one of the stories they do with us, and it's really thorough. So this is basically a representation of what is happening everywhere in space around you at all times throughout the story. So if you happen to turn around and look, this is what you'll see. But that golden path through the middle is what we hope that you'll choose to look at. And it's also where we will bring you back to if you decide, if you decide to go look somewhere else for a little bit, it might wait for you until you come back to that. Here are just a few of those moments. So the other thing that is kind of alluded to in the video, there are all of these things that Méliès himself invented in his films, and the story is paying homage to all of those. The underwater illusion, the turning a flat picture into a three-dimensional character, having something disappear with a puff of smoke, that was him. Multiplying a character into multiple versions of himself, and then the floating head, which is actually one of my favorite pieces. So we just show a few examples of some of the design we actually have. One of the designers who worked on this, here's Celine Dermot. She'll be able to come back afterwards for Q&A, hopefully, if any of you have any questions. I think these are Hélène Leroux's designs, right? For the main character. She's one of the two directors of the piece. And here's how they adapt into 3D. Again, the team at Nexus is wonderful at working with these very simplified shapes, getting something that's very appealing out of it. Some of the imagery from the tabletop world and the different variations of Méliès himself. Here are some of Celine's color boards. all based on the color palettes of the different films as they were hand-colored back in the day. Actually transitioning between these different worlds was accomplished with some just really clever shader hacks by the effects team at Nexus. One of the other fun things about this, I talked a little bit about how you can have events that wait until you're looking and do something different depending on the timing of that. One of the questions that comes up is, if this has got musical accompaniment, how does the music respond to that? So we have a wonderful little video that illustrates that. So here's what happens if you follow the main character. It goes right into the second movement. But what if you don't follow the main character? Our music and sound director calls it kind of accordion, it was a, I can't remember, it's the armadillo of music, or little elastic Lego pieces that fit together. A little moment at the end of the film. This is another one of the techniques that you would see in stage plays, but also in some of these films, that you have these basically flat cards that move aside and create the illusion of three-dimensional movement, this illusion of actually flying through space to the moon. They had a lot of fun with this idea in the three-dimensional space. So this is what this looks like from above and from the side. And as you're moving through the world, you see these cards come by you as the camera, but they're just these cardboard cutouts, and they flop over and fall behind you. And you would only notice that if you actually look behind you at the very end of the film, which almost nobody ever does. That's one of the types of little Easter eggs that they'll put out for you. Another thing about this that was a first for us is that because it was a Google Doodle, this meant it was going to be on Google's homepage worldwide, and we released it on every format that we could possibly have on the same day. Actually, not just on the same day, but it was going to be 3 a.m. West Coast time. That was when it was going to start in Australia. And the coordination that required between all of these different teams was really stupendous. And I was very impressed that the whole thing went off without a hitch. That is that. You'll be able to see that across the street in the exhibition. And then let's talk a little bit about Age of Sail. So let me show you a trailer for this, just to get.
This world has no use for an old sailor. And I was supposed to be alone.
Not alone.
So this is directed by a guy named John Cars, who you might know if you're familiar with the animation world. He directed a short film called Paperman while he was at Disney, and that won an Oscar when it came out. It's a beautiful, beautiful film that combines hand-drawn imagery with computer animation in 3D. And it was produced with a studio in LA, a design and animation studio called Chromosphere, who we had actually worked with before. We did a short called Sonaria with them, which was one of our first music-based experiments that they brought a beautiful visual style to. So they already had experience with our tools and experience thinking about the world in 360 and VR. And then it turned out that actually John Cars and Chromosphere also worked together on a short called June, which was, I think, a commercial for Lyft, but also a beautiful 7-minute short. So we have a group of people who are already speaking the same language artistically, which was a great foundation for doing our work together. So here's what John pitched to us when he first brought the project to Spotlight Stories. You know, it's a story of, it's a redemption story, right? This is a story about a man who's turned away from the world because he believes that the world doesn't need him anymore, that he doesn't matter. But someone comes into his life who forces him to think about that differently and change. And there's a strong legacy of these kinds of stories in film, everything from Great Expectations to True Grit, Children of Men, even Logan. And this is kind of the emotional core of the story that John was inspired by. The setting, it's set in the year 1900, just as the age of sailing has been overtaken by steamships. And our main character is this old sailor who was once at the top of his game and now feels like the world is passing by. And a young girl named Lara literally drops into his life and forces him to transform. And John had always thought these were just, you know, photographs that he pulled from an archive, but he always had Ian McShane in the back of his mind as like, that would be the perfect guy. And then they actually talked to Ian McShane and he said yes. So we have the voice of Ian McShane for Avery, and another very talented actor named Kathy Ang was the voice of Lara. John is a sailor also. He comes from a sailing background, and you know, his dad used to build wooden boats and they used to sail them together. And he always had a lot of frustration with the way that Hollywood movies portray the ocean, because it's either very obviously shot on, you know, a backlot in LA or in some, you know, swimming pool somewhere, you know, much more flat than it really is, or it's this extreme, you know, perfect storm, giant computer-generated waves the size of buildings. You know, none of that actually captures what it's really like to be on the ocean, on the open ocean. But it should be possible to convey that feeling. And doing this in VR felt like an opportunity to really capture that. And in the same way that, like, if you've ever seen a photograph of the Grand Canyon, it's not the same as actually being there. It's actually a lot less impressive than actually being immersed in that space. So it felt like an opportunity to do something in exactly that way that demands to be done immersively, because that's the only way that you can truly understand what it's like. Also, most of the animation world is still, I think, a little bit obsessed with photorealism and trying to make things more perfect and more realistic. And this felt like an opportunity to do something different with the visual style. So here's, this is a part of an animatic that John drew just early on to try to capture some of that feeling. What it would be like to be in the water with the character. You know, what it would be like to be in the water, what it's like to be on the boat, rocking in the water. But you can already tell, like, what we thought looking at this is, how on earth are we going to do this in VR on a mobile phone on all the range of different devices that we intend to support. John is a smart guy. He's been in computer graphics since the beginning, worked at Disney and Pixar and Blue Sky since the early days. And so he understands what limitations are and how to work with them. And so his approach was to say, you know, let's take advantage of the low poly count and actually stylize the imagery. And let's leverage the lessons of the great illustrators and bring some of that to it. So who were those illustrators that we looked at? This is a guy named Thomas Hoyne, who actually did a lot of painting in the 1980s. Not that you can tell from looking at it, because it all feels like it's from another era. Not so much literally for the oil painting texture, but for the fact that you really feel like you're there with these characters. The believability of it is tremendous. Another illustrator named Bernie Fuchs was a big inspiration for all of us. He did a lot of work in the 60s for magazines, and there's a kind of a glow and luminosity to his work that, with darkened edges and an interior light to things. And he also did a lot of painting with boats. There was an artist named Tatsuro Kyuchi, who's a Japanese illustrator, did a lot of magazine covers and things. And great use of simplified, limited palette, and simple shapes. So VR is known for making people nauseous. This was actually a real safety warning that they put up in the VR area just a week ago at the LA Film Festival. You know, it's a real thing. Anytime there's any kind of disconnect between what your eyes are seeing and what your inner ear is telling you is happening, you know, millions of years of evolution has engineered our bodies to say, probably those berries you ate were poisonous and you should probably get rid of those right now and you get sick. It's a lot like being seasick. So here we are. We're going to do this on a sailboat in the open ocean, rocking in the waves. This might be a bad idea. And if it is a bad idea, we really need to find out fast. And so the first thing we did was, as quick as we could, create a really, really simple scene that we could use to test out different types of movement, because it's really the movement that's the issue. How much can the boat rock and pitch in the waves? How should the camera move with the boat? What if you need to make a U-turn with this boat? Should you rotate the entire world around you, or should the boat revolve around you and the rest of the world stay stable? What's the right choice there? And doing this in a really simple scene with experiments gave us a great way to find out. So here's our amazing producer, Jenny Rim, actually being our canary. It's very important to have a canary in your group. You need to identify the person who is the most sensitive to motion sickness. Because if they don't throw up, then you know that it works. So what did we learn from this? Main lessons that we got: peripheral vision is super important for keeping people feeling stable. You must keep the horizon level at all costs. Don't start tilting the entire world that way. And make sure that there's enough detail in the sky and in the horizon line to give people's peripheral vision something to anchor onto. And then in terms of what the boat can do, pitching and rolling the boat is actually fine, it turns out. It didn't give people any trouble at all. And even translating the boat up and down as it goes over the waves is fine because you're moving with it. You don't actually perceive that as motion because what you see happening on the horizon remains stable. But don't turn the boat too quickly. That leads to trouble really quickly. So we had in early versions of the story quite a few large turns, and we reduced those and just toned them down so that they were more subtle. So it was really important for the story that this experience be grounded in truth, right? The characters are going to be in peril. They're going to be experiencing dangers, and the threat of that needs to feel real to you as you're experiencing it with them. And so, and also because John cares about sailing, we wanted to get things right. So we took a boat trip, and actually everyone on the crew, Celine, Neff over there is our head of animation who was hoisting the sail, and they taught us everything that they could about how to coil ropes, how to hoist a sail, and we made observations about everything that we could about the way light moves through the sails, the way it ripples off the water, etc. We learned what luffing is, what tacking is, and where terms like leeway come from. All of this went into the story. And then to find the actual style of the show, this is where our production designer, Celine Deramo, comes in. She led a team of artists who brought all kinds of elements into play. This wasn't the first image to get done, but it was one that I wanted to call out because it struck me right away. This is an artist named Bruno Mongoku, who was one of the character designers who really quickly found this. What struck me about this is that there's a tremendous amount of storytelling happening here in these images, but there's no line, there's no texture, there's no color. There's just value and shape, and those two elements alone are enough to convey an enormous amount of storytelling information. So that became kind of part of the language as character design and as the design of everything went on throughout the show. Here's our main character, Avery, in a few different poses, all working within that low poly feel. And it's starting to evolve in a more organic direction, and starting to explore some of the water textures and things. And then here's another one of our artists named Jasmine Lai at Chromosphere, one of the founders there, who started to bring in some of these organic kind of painterly qualities in the sky and the water. And these artists are also, they're not just designers, they're also terrific communicators. So a lot of these drawings, actually, a lot of these paintings came with instruction manuals for how you could make one of these paintings, which is extremely helpful to me as a computer graphics person. And then here's some of Jasmine's splash paintings. And then back to Celine's work, these were some of the light boards, just to convey the mood of the different moments in the story. And I'm not going to show you all of them because I don't want to spoil how it ends. You'll see that tomorrow. So at this point, this is where I come into the story. I'm the technical art lead for the team, and my job is really, most of it on a project like this is look development. So my job description really is, I'm the guy who's supposed to take the concept art seriously. It's always been frustrating to me to see, if you look at the Art Of book about almost any of the big Hollywood animated movies, you look at the paintings that were done, and they're just gorgeous. They're these pastels and watercolors and oil paintings and all these things. And then you look at the end result, and it looks like more computer animation. And it just frustrates me tremendously. I want to make things that look like the painting did in the first place. These computers are actually incredibly flexible machines. They're incredibly powerful. It should be possible to do that. The question is, can you do that in 11 milliseconds per frame in real time? So that's my job, basically. And it's a messy process. There's a lot of wrong turns and blind alleys involved. This is basically just, I took screenshots constantly while working. I like to take screenshots of the mistakes, especially because it's a good reminder of where you came from. And it's a technical process, part of it's an exploratory and more creative process. But what it all is motivated by is it's trying to understand what is actually involved in the decisions that these artists are making when they make these paintings. The paintings that these people are making, every mark that they put on the screen is put there for a reason. Everything is a choice, and there is a logic behind it. And if you can understand that and figure out what's going on, you can actually teach the computer to replicate some of those choices. Again, having artists like Celine and Jasmine, Kevin Dart, and John Cars himself, these people are also all amazing communicators, and we ended up having quite a lot of back and forth throughout this process where they would paint a painting, I would write some shaders, show them some imagery, that would inspire them to paint another painting, and then they would come over and explain how the painting works, and it was this kind of virtuous spiral of communication that was very rewarding for me. So what were we chasing after in this crazy seizure-inducing process? So here's one of Jasmine's paintings that, again, not necessarily the final look of the show, but it was something that captured a lot of these key qualities, and I just want to call them out. So we're working with a limited palette, right? There are 4 shades of blue in that swatch, not an infinite number. The shadow shapes have kind of a rounded quality to them, and the edges all have a rough, broken texture to them. If any of you saw a piece that we did called Pearl a few years ago, again, working with kind of similar language of roughened edges there. And then the transitions from light to shadow on rounded surfaces, sometimes in some places where we choose to, would have kind of a palette knife effect of gradations through a few different shades of color. All of this makes sense in the context of a painting, which is flat and not moving. But how does that translate into VR? That's the type of question that I get really excited about, because it's an act of interpretation. How should every one of these little details move when the character is moving? How should they move when you are moving relative to them? How should they spatialize in stereo when you're looking at them with both your eyes at once? So there's some interesting technical problems you have to solve to do that. One of the solutions we came up with is something that we call meta texture. It's basically like a multi-resolution texture that you can apply to any surface, and it responds and preserves the overall level of visual detail no matter how you're looking at it, whether you get close or far away, or also as the surfaces become oblique to camera, instead of the textures stretching and squashing and getting pixely, they retain that level of detail. Here's how that looks in the context of the ocean. What's happening here is we're actually moving from just about a meter off the surface to a kilometer above the surface, but at every moment you're always seeing the same level of detail. And then the edge roughening, we do this with a warping technique. So what you see here on the left is the warp texture. It's just like a vector field that warps the pixels. We're just pushing pixels around on the screen, basically. But we use metatexture on top of that to make sure that the tooth of that edge always feels consistent, and yet it always tracks with the characters as they're moving around through space. It's never too soft or blurry, never too sharp. If you saw Pearl in VR, you would notice that you could actually get really close to the character and their rough edges would get all mushy. So we wanted to make sure that didn't happen here. And then dividing the scene into lit and shadowed regions. We'd start with something like this is your typical CG lighting model with cast shadows and whatnot. But then we would, I'll just do a little before and after here, we would take that and actually threshold it, do some image processing on it, and actually put some edge darkening around those edges of those shapes. I've exaggerated it here because we're a big room, but it's actually a lot more subtle than that. And then we use that as a mask to blend between the lit and shadowed textures everywhere on all characters in the scene. And those lit and shadow textures can be completely art directed and were hand painted many times by Celine and by Kevin and the other artists on the team. And here's how that ends up looking in context. So you can see those palette of textures kind of appearing and emerging kind of dynamically. So talking about effects, the ocean was a really pivotal part of this story. Obviously, it is essentially the third main character in the film. So our effects lead, Teresa Latsko at Chromosphere, did these tests. Basically, we were partners in crime on the show. She moved things around and made geometry, and I put pixels on them and colors and textures. So you can see the kind of evolution of the ocean and of the different ways that we interact with it. It started out more geometrical and kind of formal, and evolved in a direction that has more naturalistic movement, actually using the mechanics of real ocean waves. And that was important because, again, we need the viewer to feel immersed and feel like this is an ocean that you could drown in if you fell. And that's kind of a critical thing here. And so this is sort of how it evolved. By the end of the first 3 months, we started every one of these projects with what we call a proof of concept phase, and this was the end result of the proof of concept. 3 months of development, so we brought this out to some festivals and things and got a really good response, and that's how we knew that we were on the right track with everything. It may not be obvious from looking at this here, but if you look out to the horizon, it seems like the ocean goes on effectively forever, and it really doesn't. It only goes out about maybe 50 meters or so from the boat, and we use some tricks from the game development world where the ocean is actually made up of a bunch of copies, identical copies of a single tile, but we do some vertex tricks to kind of push it down and create a fake horizon, and the tiles disappear behind you and reappear in front of you, but you don't ever see it happen. And then things like splashes, they're all actually textures. You saw some of the textures that Jasmine painted, but with some shader magic and that texture applied on top. So, talk a little bit about sound. This is probably one of the most complex pieces that we've done yet in terms of how the sound works. Sound always gets the short end of the stick because it's the end of the talk, but it's one of the most important parts of the story. I always say that if you see any of the stuff that we've done and you think it looked great, there's actually a 50% chance that it really sounded great, and that convinced you that it looked great. That's how important the sound really is. And in this one, there's actually moments where you are in the water with the characters, and you have the freedom to if you choose, put your head below the ocean surface, and everything about the imagery and the sound environment changes in response to that. It was actually a technique that we developed for Sonaria, the piece that we'd done last year, and then we refined it and expanded it for this show. And here's our director of music and sound, Scott Stafford, conducted the orchestra. He also has some really fantastic ideas about how to spatialize the sound. Quick overview, just of like what did we learn from this production. People always ask how long did it take, and so I finally just decided to crunch the numbers and make a graph. So this is the real deal. This is actually from the actual check-ins of files from all the different departments on Age of Sail. And you can see there's that proof of concept, that little hump on the left, and then the actual production is the bigger bump on the right. And you can, another thing to notice here is how much the different versions that we were working on overlapped with each other. The red, the 3 different shades of red up there are all work that was done specifically for the 2D film of the show, which was we were working on in tandem with VR. So that dark red is just the camera work, just establishing as the animation was being done, what are the camera angles, and that was like an ordinary cinematography pass that was done between our cinematographer, our director, and an editor, and then rendering and compositing on top of that. Other big differences, in film you cut a lot from one shot to another, and in some films like Pearl you might cut as well, but in this film we did not cut, and so this is the same story, but this is how many cuts there are in the story. And actually, those 2 purple ones in the middle are actually one long continuous shot. We just had to break it up into 2 because otherwise Maya would crash. And then, of course, in film, if you're an animator and you have a character to animate, when that character walks off screen, forget about it, they're gone. And in VR, there is no such thing as off screen. So you have to not just think about what your characters are going to be doing, you have to keep them alive and keep them present in the moment. So it's a lot more like thinking about it like you're a stage actor than a film actor. One other really important thing, doing a real 3D layout pass of the whole story was super, super critical because in the case of Age of Sail, everything is interdependent. The movement of the waves depends on the direction of the wind. And the direction of the wind influences where we're choosing to go with the boat as the characters are moving through space. And the movement of the waves influences the rocking of the boat, and the rocking of the boat influences how the characters respond. And the things the characters are doing with the tiller and the ropes are influencing what the sailors are doing. It's a big, tangled web. So we had to get all of that right before we could really nail down and polish the character animation. And despite our best efforts, it did not always go smoothly. I'm going to show you a clip that contains a mistake that happened. I want to just see if anybody spots the mistake.
So you know a bit about boats, eh?
I quite like sailboats, actually.
Oh, well then, I'm the weather helmet, tighten that starboard jib sheet when I say.
What?
Pull the rope on your right when I hop, and hang up. You'll be heeled over in much when all the cabins are done. Now, pull!
Okay, so any sailors in the audience? Yes. Yeah, so he says, tighten that starboard jib sheet, pull the rope on your right, which is on the other side of the boat. Why did that happen? Well, what happened was, when we did the first layout pass, everything was happening the other way. The wind was coming from the left side of the boat, it was heeled over in that direction, Lara was actually pulling the boat on the right, and so that's what the dialogue said as it was written. And then we realized in the layout process that we needed to flip it in the other direction because it was going to make more sense staging-wise for all the things that needed to happen after that, and where things are relative to the camera. And we just had this little pesky problem that now the dialogue was completely completely wrong. And our producer, Jenny Rim, was actually able to get Ian McShane back into a recording booth just to re-record that line. So, because it was important that we get it right. So when you see the finished version, he says the port side jib sheet. To all of you who are out there, anybody who's an artist who's thinking about working in this medium in particular, do it. Now's the time. I think it's a theme that's been running through this, that this is the time when things are the most open and creative. It hasn't really been turned into a business yet. It's still in its infancy. And if you're an artist in particular, if you're going to be working with people on the technical side, don't let them tell you what can't be done, because they're almost certainly wrong. Instead, try to find the people who will help you figure out how it can be done, and then that's when you'll end up accomplishing something amazing. So yeah, it's all going to be playing both of these shows right across the street starting tomorrow in the VIFF Immersed area in the hangar. And I don't know how much time we have for questions, or if we do.
A couple of questions.
Yeah, so I don't know if Celine want to come up and join for this. Our production designer, Celine, there involved.